And finally, Brooke Hayes is a PhD student at the University of Victoria and chair of the NFU's Mental Health Working Group, where she brings 20 years of experience working with the BC Public Service in a variety of unique ministries. Brooke's most recent role was as executive director with the Ministry of Agriculture, where she led teams tackling climate change, marketing, land use planning, innovation, and soil, air, and water quality programs, among others. The impacts of climate change on farms and farmers sparked a deep curiosity and passion for agriculture that has inspired a return to school, where Brooke is actively investigating the relationships between healthy soils and healthy farmers in BC and beyond. I welcome each of you and thank you for coming.
I think we're going to have a presentation coming up here for me as well. And while that's coming up, I'd like to acknowledge with respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory I'm calling in from today. It's also the territory where I do most of my work, and as where the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples have historical relationships with the land that continue to this day. Just wanted to see and make sure that my presentation is going to be popping up. Perfect. Thanks so much, Tim. Okay. Here, we can go back one slide. Thank you. All right. Thank you again. So I'm happy to be here today to speak a little bit about the work of the Mental Health Working Group, which I have had the great pleasure of being a part of for about the last year. And if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. This working group has been established in part in response to a resolution passed in 2019, where it was recognized that the NFU is looking to develop ways to support members' mental health and social connection, as well as adding counseling coverage to health benefits available to members. I thought I'd add a little bit of structure to the presentation by sharing a bit about what we have learned about the state of farmers in Canada, as well as a scan that we've recently conducted on the supports that are available to farmers across the country, and outline some of the activities that we are prioritizing and some of the work that has been done so far. We can go to the next slide. I wanted to just begin by acknowledging that the state of farmers' mental health in Canada is really reflective of our current social context, that there have been many social changes that have impacted farmers, along with many other parts of our society. For example, in the 1930s, about 1 in 3 Canadians were farmers. So 30% of Canadians identified themselves as farmers in our Stats Canada census. In the 1950s, that number had dropped down to 7% of Canadians. And I just ask you to reflect for a moment what you believe today's number to be. What percentage of Canadians do you believe to be farmers in the country? And the number is less than 2%. So we've gone from 1 in 3 people in our communities being farmers to 2 in 100. So we've really seen socially a change that has really disconnected individuals from their food, from their communities, and farmers from the place where their food is being consumed. This is really an extension of the displacement of lands that were managed and owned and lived on and appreciated by Indigenous peoples for many, many thousands of years before colonial practices of command and control came in. And we're really seeing that there are some disproportionate impacts being born out of these societal changes amongst our farmers. For example, in BC, where I am, about 50% of our farmers are earning less than $10,000 a year. It's a significant, this is very, very low. These are effectively nonprofit farmers or almost poverty farmers. They must take on second jobs in order to do what they do. And only 20% of farmers in BC are really producing 80% of the farm receipts for the province. So we're seeing a consistent shift towards the enlargement, the efficiency within our food systems that has created systemic changes to how we manage the landscape. And that's really playing out particularly in some of the climate events that we're seeing. As I'm sitting here looking out the window watching our next atmospheric storm hit the coast here, I'm reflecting on some news I heard this morning where the Minister of Agriculture was asked if she could report on the number of livestock that were lost in the recent floods in the Fraser Valley. And she commented with respect that she would not be sharing those numbers because every time those numbers are being shared, farmers across the province are struggling, are having a response to that, a visceral response that is important to recognize and acknowledge. So farmers, for the most part, are on the front lines of climate change and are facing unique mental health pressures with respect to other professions. If we can go to the next slide. Climate change is really only one of many complex systemic pressures that are affecting the mental health of farmers across Canada. It's more than just climate. You can see here that farmers are facing just a barrage of pressures from across multiple spheres. The pressures of globalization and trade systems, the pressures from consumers for cheap food, the pressures from a decrease in our rural communities and decline in our infrastructure. We're seeing production costs increasing on the other side, and a decrease in our community supports available for farmers. And we know that farmers are very often alone in their journey with the challenges that are facing them. And as I say, climate change is just one of the pressures that are disproportionately affecting farmers compared to other professions. They're often isolated, they feel immense burdens of legacy, and they often, where they live is where they work, is where they play. It's not like they can take a holiday that might create more stress. So how bad is it? So we've had some recent pan-Canadian research that has identified that 12% of Canadian farmers are suffering from burnout. We have 58% of farmers expressing anxiety in their day-to-day, and 35% of farmers are suffering from depression. That's compared to 7.5% of the Canadian population in general. So our farmers are 5 times more likely to suffer from depression, and we know that suicide is common and underreported on our farms in Canada. It's a national issue, national crisis, we could call it. And it's important to note that the pressures that you see on the screen here, they don't impact everyone equally. We know that those that are more at risk for racism, disabilities, and poverty are more disproportionately affected by some of these issues. And the same systems that are at play that are disenfranchising and affecting the mental health of farmers across Canada are the same systems that have fragmented and disconnected most of our consumers from the places where our food is produced. If we can go to the next slide. I believe in the work of the committee is founded on the idea that these complex systemic issues affecting farmers are the roots of stress that are undermining national and local priorities. And that when we don't consider the mental health of farmers, we are undermining our ability to achieve these national and local priorities that are economic, social, and environmental in nature. If we believe that the mental health of farmers plays a role in their decision-making around equipment purchases and how they manage the soil, how they interact with their consumers, this is critical from a national perspective. We have to pay attention to this. And I think it's really important to recognize that our farmers often have deep emotional connections to their family, to their place, and they have a very strong land-based connection, which is different from many professions and many individuals in Canada. I think that it's really important that the feelings of agency, the feelings of hope, the feelings of optimism and community that are experienced by a farmer can change their response to something like climate change and the major issues that are facing in terms of these climate crises. I think it's also important to note that our current policy framework for mental health doesn't exist with respect to farmers, but our farm policies in general are typically designed with our large-scale farmers in mind. We really see small-scale family farms, particularly diverse farms who are seeking to adapt to climate change, are really operating mostly invisible to federal and provincial regulations. To bring those voices forward and the needs of those communities forward is incredibly challenging. And so I'm really grateful to have a chance to share some of this work with you. I'd like to move to the next slide, which starts to talk a little bit about what we found in terms of the state of farmer mental health supports across the country. So one of the first tasks of the working group was to set out and understand what are the resources available to farmers across Canada. And what we were specifically interested in were those resources that are specifically designed for farmers, not necessarily a general stress line or stress or mental health resources, but those that are particularly understanding the unique pressures and systemic forces that are challenging farmers. What we found is that you might not be surprised that there are many informational resources, static resources that exist that, if you have access to the internet, which many of our farms and farmers do not, you do have access to those resources. And of course, they're not limited to where you are. But also wanted to recognize that when we're thinking about the mental health supports, we weren't just thinking about, owners of farms, we were thinking about the workers on the farms, the farm family members, and even stewards of land. So we're not talking just strictly for owners of land. So from an information perspective, there's a number of resources. Even the National Farmers Union website has been updated with a resource page that includes all of the resources we were able to find. So if you are interested, you can take a look there. We also did find some training and workshops are being offered across the country. So in Ontario, there's an In the Know training program, which is specifically designed to train counselors to understand and be more attentive to the needs of farmers, as well as in Saskatchewan, they're piloting an online therapy unit, which is a place where farmers can go and get training on how to cope with some of the challenges associated with mental health. We know that there is a benefit to individuals, particularly farmers, that have a network of community members that they can lean into. And so peer support is kind of our next level up in terms of supports. But what we find, especially as we go further along this continuum, is that those peer supports are scattered. We do see some activity at the chapter level, but it's very sort of ad hoc. There's not it's not scaled across regions in a particularly, I guess, coordinated way. We do see a couple of stress lines that are in place. So Saskatchewan does have a farmer stress line, and Manitoba does have a rural and northern support crisis and chat line. That one's not farmer specific, but it is at least attentive to the needs of rural communities and is specifically designed for the needs of northern and rural communities. And when it comes to counseling services, they're rare. They're incredibly rare. We do see in Ontario, members of the OFA are able to access a farmer wellness program that was developed by an individual farmer/counselor who saw the need in her community and basically stood up a counseling service that is now chapter by chapter moving out amongst a group of individuals, and she's offering services there. It's limited only by the number of counselors that actually have that farm specific knowledge. And PEI does have a farmer assistance program that is specific for farms and farm families, and anyone who works on a farm, they can call and they can have 4 free counseling sessions. I think it's really important to recognize here that there's no real national presence for farmers' mental health that we can see. That these networks are really critical to creating that sense of belonging, and our current systems have really fragmented our ability to operate in a systemic way to create a positive change in this area. That also there has been. When we looked at BC just now with the massive crisis that happened, they're spending $360 million a day on responding to the crisis. So that's in terms of flood mitigation and everything to do with the landslides that happened. But there's not been a single resource identified for mental health for people affected by that crisis. And that's really consistent. There's not a person in the ministry who's responsible for mental health either. So we're really seeing that things are standing up from the ground level so that individuals who are interested in creating counseling services for farmers in their communities are taking steps to build those services in their communities. So that's great. And maybe people know about services that I'm not aware of, and you're certainly welcome to let us know. We'd be more than happy to know that our scattered map is not quite so scattered. So please let us know if there's something we've missed along the way. Let's go to the next slide, which talks a little bit about some of the priorities that the Mental Health Working Group has been focused on over the course of the last year. I'm really excited to share that we've had the opportunity to work with some incredible colleagues in Manitoba, mostly in an advocacy and support role, to help them stand up some services for face-to-face services for counseling for farmers in Manitoba. There are some gaps. There used to be some face-to-face counseling types of supports for farmers, but those were taken away. So they're looking to backfill that service and make this available to farmers across the province. Really exciting project. I'm really excited about it because the model of what they're doing can be replicated anywhere across the country. So I think there's really an opportunity for these grassroots type of services to be established. I think it's also really important to come back to that resolution that I mentioned at the very beginning, where we're looking to add farmer-specific counseling services into the benefits package for members. And so we've been looking at the different options for that, and that is still an outstanding piece of work to look at how we might extend some of those services to members. And we've also been doing some work around addressing the root causes of farmers' mental health in Canada. The short-term acute work is absolutely critical, but unless we address the complex systemic root causes that are at play, we won't see progress. We'll simply be putting out the fires associated with the day-to-day inequities that are playing out. As I mentioned, access to these services is really limited by the inequalities in our food systems and our societies. Those that are economically disadvantaged and socially disadvantaged are often forgotten in terms of their ability to access these services. And the people and the ecosystems that are at play in our agricultural systems are being destroyed in many cases by the same systemic, root causes that are destroying farmers' mental health across the country. We can go to the next slide. I'd like to give an example of one of the ways that we're looking at those root causes. And I'll just circle back to the PhD work that I'm undertaking at the moment. So as I mentioned, the connection of ecosystems being destroyed and soil being destroyed particularly is of great concern to me. And one of the questions that I have is there a relationship between good soil quality and farmers' health? So, for example, in the same way that our gut health can be protective against mental health issues and long-term chronic disease, I'm wondering if farmers that prioritize their soil quality and have good biology in that soil are getting benefit from being in contact with that soil. So this is an area where we can look at opportunities to restore not just our soil and our ecosystems, but also restore the health of our farmers. And typically right now, the lens of farmers that I've seen in a policy environment is farmers as economic entities. Really, the context is how can we help farmers to be more economically viable? And I believe that unless we start to see the farmers as human beings that have a relationship with their community and place, and are making decisions about what happens to the soil and to the food that's grown there, we're really missing the broader picture. So part of the work that this project that I'm working on will understand is, is there a relationship between healthy soil and healthy farmers? And if so, I'll do a policy scan to understand if our current policy is making things better or worse. And we'll be able to bring some of that work back to understand what areas of our current policy environment may need attention. I think, Tim, your conversation about abattoirs has come up many, many times in my community conversations with farmers about a key source of stress. And so I think there might be some overlap to other committees and other priorities of the National Farmers Union. So I'll move to the next slide. And I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm certainly not doing this work alone. I am working with some incredible people on our working group. and we are literally coast to coast. You can see I'm out here in BC, and we go all the way out to Nova Scotia with our farmer friend Paul Wortman. And I do believe that we have both Dixie and Mara on the line today. So they've been absolutely wonderful to work with. Dixie is a farmer and counselor in Saskatchewan, and Mara is, of course, executive director and connector extraordinaire. She brings an incredible enthusiasm for the work and has been wonderful to work with. And Jofia Mendley-Zambo is a PhD candidate at York University, so she's also brought a tremendous amount of passion to this work as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that certainly many, many people thinking about this. And moving on to the next slide, I would invite you, if you're interested in this work, if any of this resonated with you and you think there are opportunities or areas that we should be paying attention to, I invite you to come and chat with us. You can either reach out to myself or to Mara. And if you're interested in the research that I was just walking through, you're certainly welcome to visit my, my project website there. It's on the screen as well. So I'll just thank you for your time and attention and look forward to any questions you might have.